then on, we spent all our spare time together. We were always broke. Our small daily allowances went on fares, lunch, and in John's case, the ciggies he smoked, Park Drive, Woodbines or Embassy, because they were the cheapest, not to mention the pints of black velvet in Ye Crack at lunchtime or after college. If we had enough money, we went to the pictures, where we sat in the double seats at the back and kissed and cuddled, mostly ignoring whatever film was on, and often sitting through a couple of showings. More often we didn't have any money at all, so we just walked and talked, or stretched out one drink in a pub or cafe. Before I started going out with John, I had been a conscientious student, completing all my work on time and putting in hours of effort. But John was a demanding lover who insisted that I put him before everything else, including college work, my friends, and my mother. Inevitably, my work took a nosedive, although I did my best to keep up. He was full of contradictions and confusion. He wanted proof daily that he mattered most to me. He was jealous of my close friendship with Phil, and even of my work, if I chose to spend an evening catching up with it instead of with him. Yet despite John's aggression and jealousy, I felt protective toward him. To me, he was a lost soul, and I wanted to give him understanding and acceptance and the security of being loved to ease his pain and bitterness. In college, I had a few admirers, although I wasn't aware of this until John pointed it out. He was incredibly jealous of any boy who came near me and wouldn't hesitate to warn them off. Not long after we got together, we went to a party at another student's flat. There was plenty of loud music, beer and cider, and we were having a good time until a very tall student I recognized from the sculpture department came over and asked me to dance. Before I could answer, all hell broke loose as John, in a blind fury, launched himself at the guy. The sculpture student was big enough to hold him off with one hand, but in the end everyone piled in to pull John away, and eventually we calmed him down. The other guy, baffled by the uproar he had unwittingly caused, apologized for upsetting John and backed away. I felt frustrated by incidents like this. John had no need to worry. I would never have been unfaithful to him, and his overreaction embarrassed me. I tried repeatedly to reassure him, but it made no difference. John was provoked to fury if any other boy paid attention to me, however innocent. Frightening and demanding as John could be, he was also romantic, a side of him I saw more often as our relationship deepened. He wrote love poems on scraps of paper and passed them to me at college. For our first Christmas, he drew a card with a picture of me in my new shaggy coat standing opposite him, our heads together, his hand on my arm. It was covered with kisses and hearts, and he wrote, "Our first Christmas. I love you. Yes, yes, yes." A few years later, he used the same idea in one of the Beatles' first hits, "She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah." On the back of the card he wrote, "I hope this won't be our last." I loved that card and kept it in pride of place in my bedroom. We had been together for a few months when John took me home to meet his Aunt Mimi. He lived with her in a smart house in Menlove Avenue in the well-off district of Woolton. The house was called Mendibs and had a big garden, and at one time the mayor of Liverpool had lived next door. The joke was that although John called me posh, he came from a far better-off family than I did. Our little semi-over-the-water in Hoylake was half the size of Mendip's. I was nervous about meeting Mimi. I knew she had brought John up and that it was important she liked and approved of me. So I wore my smartest skirt, sweater, and prepared to be on my best behaviour. Mimi was a striking woman, not tall but with presence. She was slim, with the fine bone structure characteristic of John's family. When we arrived, she smiled at me, invited us into the breakfast room next to the kitchen. I saw instantly that Mimi was a woman who didn't miss a trick. Sharply observant, she sized me up throughout the visit. We sat at the dining table watching Mimi make us the standard Liverpool tea of egg and chips, with a mountainous plate of bread and butter and a huge pot of tea. While we ate, Mimi asked questions. She was friendly but cool. More than once I caught her looking at me so penetratingly that I was unnerved. I was glad when the meal was over and John walked me to the bus stop. "Do you think she liked me?" I asked John. "Yes, sure," he said. "Don't worry about Mimi. If I like you, she'll like you." Mimi's manner was almost regal. She spoke without a hint of scouse, and I thought John must have adopted his working-class Liverpool accent as a rebellion against her. John's first meeting with Mum was more successful. He wasn't the respectable, hard-working young man she had dreamed of for me, but she knew I was in love and wisely kept quiet. To my delight, John was polite and respectful to her, and they seemed to get on well. If they had reservations about each other, they didn't mention them, for which I was grateful. An incident early in our relationship showed me a side of John that I would see again at many crucial moments in our life together. Mum suggested that we invite Mimi to come for tea with John, so that she and Mimi could meet. John agreed, and on the day of the visit, Mum, determined to impress, got out her best china and made sandwiches and cakes. It started well. Mimi and Mum were both polite, and as the four of us sat down together, John and I exchanged "it's going okay" glances and began to relax. Too soon, Mimi made a remark about me distracting John from his studies, and Mum leapt to my defence. Before we knew it, they were arguing. Mimi telling Mum why I was wrong for John, Mum telling Mimi that John was lucky to find a girl like me. John and I were aghast. After a few moments, he got up and fled from the house, and I ran after him. I raced down the street to catch him up and found him in tears. Eventually I persuaded him to come back, and when he reappeared, Mum and Mimi had called a frosty truce. John couldn't stand conflict or confrontation, and his reaction was invariably to escape. It was in stark contradiction to his often aggressive manner, but in fact he was only confrontational when he had been drinking. He was often cutting and critical, but mostly he went out of his way to avoid direct conflict. The incident also told me a great deal about John and Mimi's relationship. When she was openly critical of me, it hurt and humiliated John, but she either didn't notice or didn't care because she carried on. Time after time I saw her upset him with negative remarks about him or someone he cared for. John would become angry and embarrassed, then run.